you?
Not too bad. Thank you all, to my union brothers and sisters and my community groups and Assemblyman Jacobson. Thank you all for the opportunity to be with you today. I've got a few slides that we wanted to put up as I was talking. I'll try and get through them quickly. All right. So where do we go from here is really the question, right? It's kind of what's happening with our New York State budget kind of post-pandemic. The next slide talks about, the fact that just FPI works statewide, as all of you know. We work from Brooklyn to Buffalo and from Long Island to New York City to Plattsburgh. We're analyzing and doing research, educating and organizing around many of these issues. The next slide talks about the fact that we're experiencing record levels of unemployment in New York. I mean, we haven't seen anything like this before, right? There's over 2 million people unemployed right now in New York State. And when you look at who's unemployed, right, 98% of those folks are making less than $68,000 a year. So it's not the wealthy who are hurting right now. It's regular folks who are out there day in and day out trying to make a living and stretch the dollar. And now we're talking about lots of different budget cuts right now that, could threaten hundreds of thousands of additional jobs, as we saw and was evidenced after the financial collapse in 2008. So the next slide talks a little bit about the fact that the governor in this year's budget got some extraordinary powers. I want to say he's like a superhero, but these are not good extraordinary powers in my opinion. But he basically, in the division of budget, has the ability to make cuts. So they set up various measurement dates, one of which we have completely blown through at this point in time, which is a good thing actually, that we haven't made cuts yet. But the governor has this power now to basically propose across the board budget cuts if revenues don't come in as anticipated. And the legislature only has 10 days to develop its own plan and respond to the governor's budget proposals. So the next slide clearly shows that we're in trouble when it comes to revenue, right? I mean, $61 billion in lost revenue through 2024, according to the state's division of budget. This year's budget gap is now at $13 billion, requiring an additional $10 billion in cuts. We're looking at about $8.3 billion from aid to localities, and that's basically a budget bill that funds all of our services in New York. Everything from public education to healthcare to human services to transportation. And then we're looking at an additional $1.6 billion from state agencies that are already been cut to the bone. So we're really talking about 20% across the board cuts that would just be absolutely devastating. And we just cannot let this happen. The next slide shows that, already we've started to freeze revenue to local governments. And that's having an impact already, right? I mean, we're hearing about local layoffs. We're hearing about nonprofits not getting contracts with the counties where they used to. And counties and cities, towns and villages, I mean, counties are already predicting, billions in lost revenue as a result of loss of sales tax, hotel occupancy taxes, all of these things that revenue streams that counties rely on. The next slide talks a little bit about the fact that, we're all in this holding pattern, right? I mean, the governor is very clear. He doesn't want to do anything until Washington acts. And Senator McConnell seems to be in no rush to move forward the HEROES Act, which would get New York State about $34 billion just for the state. It would get local governments money, tribal governments money. This needs to happen. We need to move this. 46 other states have budgets that start on July 1. And we thought McConnell was going to, wanted to hold off a little bit and kind of swoop in and save all of these states at the last minute. But the way things are looking right now, we just don't know when this is going to happen. So the question is, can we keep waiting for Washington to act? The next slide talks a little bit about our vision for what we should be doing, right? We absolutely need and deserve federal assistance to New York. We give the federal government tens of billions of dollars more a year than we get back in services. So, you know, hey, maybe we could just take a break for a year and you could just give us our money and that would really help us a lot. But there's also the Federal Reserve Bank has set up a municipal liquidity facility, which provides up to $500 billion to state and local governments of a certain size, and cities of a certain size, at nearly 0% interest. So, you know, that's another option that we should look at. And also, of course, generating new revenues from the very wealthy and those at the top. So the next slide talks a little bit about, you know, who will pay to close this budget gap. If we don't ask the wealthy to pay a little bit more, what's going to happen? You know, we're talking about massive cuts in public services and housing and education and healthcare, and these are going to disproportionately fall on the same people who, you know, have been victims of the COVID crisis as well, right? Poor communities, communities of color. They've been hardest hit by COVID. They've been hardest hit by, you know, with the highest infection rates and disproportionate death rates. And at the same time now, we're going to add insult to injury by making huge cuts in services that many of these folks also rely on. Next slide talks about what can we do about it, right? We know a couple of things, right? New York has the greatest income inequality of any state in the nation. The wealthy aren't paying their fair share in terms of a proportion of income. So, you know, we can do something about this, right? So we talk about a billionaire's tax. Basically what that would do is it would tax capital gains on a quarterly basis instead of just when people sell things, or, you know, they're holding on to this and they're making money over time. You know, when you tax a billionaire, guess what? They're still a billionaire. They live where they want to live. They're not going to flee. If a billionaire is in New York, it's because they want to be in New York. It's not because they're saying, oh, well, New York is going to charge me 1% more than some other state. You know, it doesn't matter when you're a billionaire. At least that's what I'm told. I would love to find out myself, but I don't think that'll ever happen. But then an ultra-millionaire's tax, right? We're talking about an additional income tax surcharge basically on people making more than $5, $10, $100 million a year. If you're making that kind of money right now in this environment, you sure can afford to pay a little bit more. And
can you make that chart bigger? Because you got very small print there. Your face is very big, but that's very small. I'd like to see the details. I can't read it. It's so small.
Sorry. I don't know if...
No, not you, the chart.
Yeah, I don't think I'm in control of it. I'm sorry.
I think, Jonathan, if you minimize the speaker's piece of it, then the presentation...
How do you do that?
Well, I'll keep talking while you figure it out, and I'll be happy to share the slides with you all as well. So, but the reality is we can generate billions of dollars from an income tax surcharge on the wealthy. Again, we talk about a pied-à-terre tax, which was already described, but I mean, we're talking about a 0.5% to 4% tax on second, third, fourth, fifth homes valued at over $5 million. We're also talking about a stock transfer tax. This is something that was in place between 1905 and 1980 in New York. So it's a very small tax on the sale of stocks. And right now what we're doing is we're collecting it and we instantly rebate it right back to the brokers that pay it to the tune of $13 billion a year. I mean, think about that. That's frightening. I mean, you know, the stock market is doing pretty darn well. And we know that billionaires have increased their net worth during this pandemic. Their net worth hasn't gone down. And then there's another issue of people using private equity financing to purchase properties and they're basically avoiding a mortgage recording tax. So the city comptroller basically showed that 80% of the sale of units in New York City valued over $5 million are cash sales. Imagine that, right? Wouldn't that be nice? The rest of us, buy a house, get a mortgage, pay a mortgage recording tax, like everybody else. So, there are all these different loopholes that the wealthy can avail themselves of that we need to close. So the next slide talks about the fact that we've done this before. There's precedent for this over the last 100 years in New York State. Every time there's been a crisis or a depression or a recession, governors have looked to the wealthy to pay a little bit more, and rightfully so, right? Whether it was FDR or Herbert Lehman, Nelson Rockefeller, in the last 2 decades, we saw it with Speaker Silver and Majority Leader Bruno coming together in a bipartisan fashion, asking the wealthy to pay a little bit more. And George Pataki, the then governor, vetoed that, and they overrode his veto in a very bipartisan fashion. And then, of course, Governor Patterson as well increased taxes on the wealthy after the financial collapse in 2008, and then that's when we saw the first millionaires tax really in New York, which still exists today. And then finally, the next slide, which you probably can't see, talks about the poll that was discussed. And yes, 90% or more of voters support all 3 of the taxes: the billionaires tax, the increased income tax on the ultra wealthy, and the tax on luxury homes, or pied-à-terre, pardon my French. The other astounding part of this poll was that 72% of respondents said that they would be more likely to vote for a member of the legislature that supported all 3 of these taxes. So people get it, right? They know that the tax system is upside down in New York, and that the wealthy are not paying their fair share. And the final slide is just questions. Oh, that was easy. So I just wanted to kind of run through that information with you. Happy to share this slide deck or have it shared with everybody. And I provided some additional information in the chat space as well. So please, if you have any questions in the future, other than today, please feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here for at the Fiscal Policy Institute. We are working with the Assembly. We are working with the Senate members right now. We are working with working groups within those to really get ready and be prepared when the governor, if and when the governor comes out with these 20% across the board cuts. We need to have an alternative solution.
Thank you so much, Ron. You're absolutely right. We need that alternative. We need to raise funds rather than continue to cut budgets. And thank you for the rationale for that we can now take into our community groups and unions and lobbying efforts and so on. So thanks.